Hey guys, welcome to Intelligent Faith 315. My name is Pastor Jay. It's good to be with you today. We're going to be continuing in our series that we started some time ago. It's called Ancient Non-Christian Historical Evidence for the Life of Jesus. Just want to take a second to welcome you to the site. You may perhaps be checking us out on the internet. Maybe you're in China, maybe you're in the Ukraine. Sometimes we get some viewers from Canada or from Germany, sometimes from Burma. Different places. So we just do really want to welcome you to the site. If you're a Christian, we do hope that the articles, the links, the information you find on Intelligent Faith 315 can serve to strengthen you in your faith, and it can help you understand the good reasons to continue to follow the Christian faith and believe the things that we do hold true as Christians that we do already believe. But if you're not a believer, if you're not a Christian, I'm really glad that you're with us, and do encourage you to just make good use of the information we have on the site, and that you do just a really good, thorough investigation. We've got numerous series that we put up on the site on evolution, on creation, the historical evidence for Jesus, which we're covering today, but also good arguments for God's existence. So do encourage you, if you're a seeker, if you haven't made up your mind yet, or if you're a skeptic, an agnostic, an atheist, do encourage you to look around. Hopefully we'll be different than some other Christian sites that you've seen. Not a whole lot of sensational exciting, flashy stuff. It's just a pretty basic website, but we just want to be kind of a bridge to put out good evidence and solid reasoning for the Christian faith, the Christian worldview that exists. So welcome you to the site. If you're a believer or if you're a seeker, we're glad to have you with us. So we're just going to jump right into it today. I don't want to waste a lot of time. We've already covered in this series ancient non-Christian historical evidence for the life of Jesus. Numerous ancient historians that aren't Christians, of course, and we've been speaking about quoting from their own literature, and we've been going over the information that they tell us about Jesus. Just by way of review, these are the historians that we've covered up until this point, and you can go into our archives and you can find these videos and watch them. We talked about Tacitus. He's a Roman historian from 55 to 120 AD. We also read the information from Suetonius, a Roman historian from the 1st century. And then also last time, we went over a very important ancient non-Christian historical source, Flavius Josephus, a very reputable, well-accepted Jewish historian. So I do encourage you to check that information out. And then today, we're going to be referencing, God willing, 3 individuals: Julius Africanus, a Roman historian; Thallus, another Roman historian; and then also not Emperor Trajan, he'll be later; Pliny the Younger, a government official from the early 2nd century. So hopefully we'll get to those today. Also, just to recap, I wanted to kind of just review quickly and draw out again the historical facts that we've learned from the writings of these different individuals. So just quickly, what historical facts have we drawn out from the documents of these Roman historians that we've read up to this point? Tacitus, Suetonius, and Josephus. What have we drawn from them? Well, from Tacitus, if you remember, we established these as historically verifiable facts from his writing. The Christians were named for their founder, Christ. Number 2, he was put to death by the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate. Number 3, this happened during the reign of Emperor Tiberius from 14 to 37 AD. Number 4, his death ended the superstition for a short time, referring probably to the resurrection, but it broke out again. Number 5. Number 6, this happened especially in Judea, where the teaching had its origin. Number 7, Jesus' followers carried his doctrine to Rome. Number 8, we learned, when the Great Fire destroyed a large part of the city during the reign of Nero, that was from 54 to 68 AD, the emperor placed the blame on the Christians who lived in Rome. 9, Tacitus reported that this group was hated for their abominations. 10, these Christians were arrested after pleading guilty. 11, we learned as historical fact, many of them were convicted for, quote, hatred for mankind. Number 12, they were mocked. Number 13, they were tortured, included being, quote, nailed to crosses or burnt to death. 14, because of these actions, the people had compassion on the Christians. And the 15th historical fact we learned from Tacitus, he concluded that such punishments were not for the public good, but were simply, quote, to glut one man's cruelty. And he's probably referring to Caesar Nero. So those are the historical facts we gathered from Tacitus, the non-Christian Roman historian. Also from Suetonius, not that much stuff, but some interesting information that we gleaned from him from his 2 historical references. The first one relates to, number 1, the expulsion of the Jews from Rome. Number 2, that it was Christ who caused the Jews to make the uproar in Rome, apparently by his teachings. And we also learn from Suetonius Number 3, he uses the word mischievous to describe the group's beliefs, more than likely referring to the resurrection of Jesus. And number 4, the term Christians identify this group as followers of the teachings of Christ. So we drew those historical conclusions from the documents that we read from Suetonius, and then also from Josephus, who we covered last week. And if you remember, the quotation from Flavius Josephus has 2 versions. The version that's much, much more supportive of Christianity, but some scholars think there's been some interpolation there. So last week we leaned on the quotation from Josephus. That's what we call the modified quotation. And just from the modified quotation, we learned these facts historically from Flavius Josephus. Number 1, Jesus was known as a wise and virtuous man, one recognized for his good conduct. Number 2, he had many disciples, both Jew and Gentiles. Number 3, Pilate condemned him to die. 4th historical fact, with crucifixion explicitly being mentioned as the mode of punishment for Jesus. Number 5, we learned the disciples reported that Jesus had risen from the dead. Number 6, we learned he had appeared to them on the 3rd day after his crucifixion. Number 7, we learned that consequently the disciples continued to proclaim his teachings. Number 8, historically we learned that perhaps Jesus was the Messiah, concerning whom the Old Testament prophets spoke about and predicted wonders. We would add here 2 facts from Josephus' earlier quotation as well. And number 9, Jesus was the brother of James. And number 10, we learned he was called the Messiah by some. So, interesting historical facts that we can gather just so far from Tacitus, Suetonius, and Flavius Josephus. And I remind you, these are non-Christian ancient historical sources, Roman and Jewish historians from the first centuries that are widely accepted and received. And so if we're going to receive their works and their testimony upon other subjects, just to be consistent, then we should also receive their testimony concerning the historical nature of this man, Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, so today we're going to continue, as I said, with a man named Thallus. He is writing from about 52 A.D., and then we're going to read a man named Julius Africanus, because he quotes the works of Thallus in the 3rd century, in the 200s A.D. So let's read through those guys, and if we have time, we'll get to Pliny the Younger. Okay, here we go. Thallus. At least the death of Jesus was mentioned in ancient history, composed many years before Tacitus, Suetonius, or Josephus ever wrote, and probably even prior to the Gospels. About 52 A.D., a man named Thallus wrote a history of the eastern Mediterranean world from the Trojan War to his own time. The work itself has been lost, and only fragments of it exist in the citations of others. One such scholar who knew and spoke of it was Julius Africanus, and he writes in 221 A.D. So as I said, though the original writings of Thallus apparently have been lost, it's been cited by other people. This is a normal historical practice you can use in historiography to establish the information from previous authors. So Julius Africanus, writing in 221 A.D., he quotes Thallus, so let's read what he has drawn. And the reason why we can do this is because more than likely, if he's quoting from Thallus, it's 150 years before him, he probably has access to some remaining manuscripts of his own day. It is debated whether Thallus was the same person referred to by Josephus as a wealthy Samaritan who was made a freedman by Emperor Tiberius and who loaned money to Herod Agrippa. In speaking of Jesus' crucifixion, and listen to this, the darkness that covered the land during this event, Africanus found a reference in the writings of Thallus that dealt with this cosmic report. So again, this is referring to the existence of Jesus, his crucifixion, but then also the darkness that covered the land. And I believe also he's going to reference the earthquake that took place as mentioned in the Gospels. So that's pretty interesting. If you've never heard of the fact that there's a historical reference in non-Christian sources for the crucifixion, the darkness, and the earthquake as mentioned in the Gospels, well then you should take note of Thallus and Julius Africanus, their reference here. So Julius Africanus asserts, quote, "On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were torn by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness Thallus, in his 3rd book of his history, calls, as appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun." Let me read that again. This is Julius Africanus' quotation from his book. "On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness Thallus, in the 3rd book of his history, calls, as it appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun, end quote. Professor Habermas, who's writing this paper that I'm just reading to you, says Julius Africanus objected to Thallus' rationalization concerning the darkness that fell on the land at the time of the crucifixion, because an eclipse could not take place during the time of the full moon, as was the case during the Jewish Passover season. But Wells, a scholar, raises a fair question about this testimony. Africanus only implies that Thallus linked the darkness to Jesus' crucifixion, but we are not specifically told if Jesus is mentioned in Thallus' original history at all. In this brief statement by Thallus refers to Jesus' crucifixion, we can ascertain that, here's 3 historical facts we can draw from this. Number 1, the Christian gospel, or at least an account of the crucifixion, was known in the Mediterranean region by the middle of the 1st century A.D., and this brings to mind the presence of Christian teachings in Rome mentioned by Tacitus and Suetonius. Historical fact number 2, there was a widespread darkness in the land implied to have taken place during Jesus' crucifixion. And number 3, unbelievers offered rationalistic explanations for certain Christian teachings or for supernatural claims not long after their initial proclamation, a point to which we will return below. So, interesting reference from Thallus, referenced by Julius Africanus in 221 AD, referencing the earthquake, the darkness, and so forth. You can check it out for yourself. Pretty interesting. Let's move on to Pliny the Younger. He's a government official, and his dates are from about 112 AD, basically. He was a government official, Pliny the Younger. A Roman author and administrator who served as the governor of Bithynia in Asia Minor, Pliny the Younger was the nephew and the adopted son of a natural historian known as Pliny the Elder. The younger Pliny is best known for his letters, and Bruce, a scholar, refers to him as, quote, one of the world's great letter writers whose letters have attained the status of literary classics. So, again, if there is any legitimacy to history at all, we should accept the historical testimony and the documentation that we can read from Pliny the Younger, right? 10 books of Pliny's correspondence are extant today. They're available. The 10th book, written around 112 AD, speaks about Christianity in the province of Bithynia and also provides some facts about Jesus. Pliny found the Christian influence was so strong that the pagan temples had been nearly deserted, pagan festivals had severely decreased, and the sacrificial animals had few buyers. Because of the inflexibility of the Christians and the emperor's prohibition against political association, Governor Pliny took action against the Christians. Yet because he was unsure how to deal with the unbelievers, if there should be any distinctions in treatment, or if repentance made any difference, he wrote to Emperor Trajan, the Roman emperor, to explain his approach. So again, he's going to be asking Trajan some questions here and how he should deal with Christians during this time of persecution and examination. Pliny dealt personally with the Christians who were turned over to him. He interrogated them, he inquired if they were believers. If they answered in the affirmative, he asked them 2 more times under the threat of death. If they continued firm in their belief, he ordered them to be executed. Sometimes the punishment included torture to obtain desired information, as in the case of 2 female slaves who were deaconesses in the church. If the person was a Roman citizen, they were sent to the emperor in Rome for trial. If they denied being Christians or had disavowed their faith in the past, they, quote, repeated after me an invocation to the gods and offered adoration to your, speaking of the Roman emperor's, image. Afterwards, they, quote, finally cursed Christ. Pliny explained that his purpose in all this was, quote, that multitudes may be reclaimed from error, unquote. So I'm going to take a second and encourage you. This may not be the case, but some of you may live in countries today, and you might be viewing this video, because we do get viewers from different parts of the world, a couple hundred folks every week, 300 to 400. If you are a Christian and you're living in a country where you are being persecuted for your faith, I personally don't face that physically in Puerto Rico, in the Western Hemisphere where I live, but I encourage you to remain strong. Many of you may not know that Christians today in the 20th century suffer more bloodshed and more persecution than in all previous centuries combined. So if you do happen to be in China, if you do happen to be in any Eastern European republic or country where you do face persecution, let me know, even anonymously, and we'll be praying for you. We'll try to help you, but be encouraged that your brothers and sisters around the world are going through it, but they have been doing so even since the beginnings of the early church. So you're in our prayers. Let me know if there's something that you'd specifically like prayer about, if there's something we could do for you here at Intelligent Faith 315. Just want to encourage you with that. Continues on and says, since Pliny's letter is rather lengthy, we will quote the portion which pertains directly to an account of early Christian worship to Christ. Here he says, quote, they, meaning the Christians, were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, and they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God. So he's obviously giving historical testimony to the worship and the recognition of Christ's deity of the early church. They sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath, not to any wicked deeds, but to never commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up. After which it was their custom to separate and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. And it says at this point, Pliny adds that Christianity attracted persons of all societal ranks, all ages, both sexes, both from the city and the country. Fascinating historical reference. Let me read it one more time. They, the Christians, were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light. And they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God, and they bound themselves by a solemn oath, not to do any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, or theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up, after which it was their custom to separate and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. What can we learn? Here we go. 10 historical facts. I believe we are going to cover, actually 11, and then we'll be done for today. Number 1, Christ was worshipped as God by early believers. Contrary to common opinion or common misinformation by Jehovah's Witnesses and many liberal New Testament scholars and atheists and so forth, Christ has been recognized back into the very, very early 30s as being worshipped by the early church. Larry Hurtado of Edinburgh University says that binary worship, or binitarian worship actually, in other words, the Father and the Son, binitarian worship is recorded historically back to about 35, 34 AD. But of course, Pliny the Younger, he also references that Christ was worshipped as God by the early church believers. Number 2, we learn historically that Pliny refers late in his letter to the teachings of Jesus and his followers as, quote, excessive superstition and, quote, contagious superstition, unquote, which is reminiscent of the words of Tacitus and Suetonius. Number 3, we learn Jesus' ethical teachings are reflected in the oath taken by Christians never to be guilty of a number of sins mentioned in the letter. Number 4, we find a probable reference to Christ's institution of communion and the Christian celebration of the love feast, or the agape dinner, the love feast, in Pliny's remark about their regathering to partake of ordinary food. The reference here alludes to the accusation on the part of non-Christians that believers were suspected of ritual murder and drinking of blood during these meetings, again confirming our view that communion is the subject to which Pliny is referring. And that may seem odd to you, but according to Christian theology, the just partaking of the bread and the wine is a memorial act, a memorial service commemorating, remembering the body and the blood of Jesus. But when the non-Christian Romans or pagans heard that expression, the body and the blood of Jesus, they actually circulated the rumor that the early Christians were gathering for a cannibalistic feast of blood and flesh. And so that's what he's referring to here. Number 5, we also learn there is a possible reference to Sunday worship, which is the first day of the week in the Jewish thinking. Possible reference to Sunday worship in Pliny's statement that Christians met, quote, on a certain day. Number 6, we see Pliny's method of dealing with believers from their identification to their interrogation and then their execution. From those who denied being Christians, worship of the pagan gods and the emperor gained them their freedom. They gave in. They capitulated. They sacrificed. Don't give up if that's you as a Christian. Don't capitulate. Number 7, interestingly, Pliny reports that true believers could not be forced to worship the gods or the emperor. Number 8, Christian worship involved a pre-dawn service. Might not be a good idea in a place where Christianity is illegal. Hidden, secretive location, pre-dawn service. It included singing hymns. The early time probably facilitated a normal working day. And 10, these Christians apparently formed a typical cross-section of society in Bithynia, since they were of all classes, all ages, localities, and both sexes. And 11, there were recognized positions in the church, as illustrated by the mention of the 2 female deaconesses who were tortured for information. While Pliny does not relate many facts about Jesus, he does provide a look at a very early example of Christian worship. Believers were meeting regularly and they were worshiping Jesus. So that's all the time we have for today. I do encourage you to do some more historical research of your own on Thallus, Julius Africanus, and on Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor who had personal correspondence with Roman Emperor Trajan. Hope this information is of benefit to you guys. Again, I encourage you to go to GaryHabermas.com. You can download this dissertation paper there for free and just research it yourself. You can pass it on to folks. Do encourage you guys to forward this video today to maybe one person. If you guys can just maybe forward some of the information that we share with you here to maybe 3 people per week, just something to multiply the growth, to multiply the number of people that Intelligent Faith can reach out to, we'd be really blessed. We just want to get the truth out, the evidence out to as many folks as possible and see what will happen. So God bless you guys. See you next time, and until then, have an intelligent faith.